You're listening to the Easy Feed Podcast, episode number 3. Hi there, I'm Karina Savage, and with over 20 years experience feeding children, including my own, I've learnt all the secrets that busy mums need to get their children eating better and actually enjoying healthy foods. So a huge welcome to the Easy Feed Podcast. Welcome back, everybody. Today is all about bread. Bread. I tell you, if I was going to a stranded island tomorrow and I was told that I could only take 3 things, bread and butter would be at the top of my list. I don't meet too many people that don't like bread, including kids. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to chat about a much loved daily product that we all enjoy so that we can make better choices for our families. I tell you, I can still vividly remember, I can almost taste it still, when I used to go shopping with my Nonna in a big department store called David Jones, and I would have probably been 11 or 12, and we would have done some shopping in the centre, and then we would go down the escalators down to the basement where this amazing freshly baked bread in this bakery, we would go down there, and as I said, I can almost still taste it, the freshly baked brioche baguette that I would have in my hands. I still remember the white paper bag. And I think, to be honest with you, I ate one myself. I probably smashed the whole thing because it was so delicious. And I just remember holding this white paper bag and just munching into this delicious, fresh brioche because it was just so good. And I have such fond memories of that time with my Nonna. Simple things, but yeah, as I said, I could almost still taste that brioche because it was just so good. So bread is a very much loved food. And, you know, for me, it has really special connections to my Nonna who's now passed. But I really look back on those times very fondly. It's probably a good thing I was pretty sporty as well. But look, I still love bread, and I just think, you know, it needs to be able to fit in our life. We can't take bread away. And look, you know, genetically, some people prefer more bread. Some people maybe genetically don't do as well with as much bread or carbohydrate in their life. But, you know, I think we need to make it fit if we possibly can and just make good choices for our bodies as much as possible. But we still need the enjoyment of bread, right? I think back then, bread was simpler. This was probably 30 years ago now that I'm talking about riding down the escalators after a shopping expedition with my Nonna. But, you know, I feel like it's so much more complicated these days. I feel that there are about 10 times, if not 20 times, as many breads on the shelves in front of us to choose from. Now we've got bakery bread, we've got a whole range of supermarket bread, just a gazillion varieties. And I was chatting about it on television this morning, and I was asked whether bread is actually good for you. And my resounding answer was yes, but the whole grain, wholemealy, whole grain option is the best. But it's not always what our children want to eat, and certainly mine don't eat whole grain either. I think I lost the whole grain battle. Years ago, I used to get whole grain into my daughter when she was younger, but since she's realised she can have a voice and say no, I now struggle with wholemeal. So, you know, I think it's about trying to find that middle ground with kids and trying to find that healthier option so that we can nourish their insides. So I'll be the first to confess that we are not a 100% whole grain, you know, bread family. I wish my kids did eat it, but they don't. And that's where we're at. So it's about making the best choices that you can with what your children will eat. And of course, you know, we also have to try and give them a little nudge and have it there available and give them a go. But at the same time, if they're not going to have it, then we have to find the best option for where they're currently at. We need to lower our expectations. So, yes, I'm a big carb lover. My mum's side's from the north of Italy, and I grew up loving pasta and bread. And what I also really love about the Mediterranean style of cooking and eating is they use a lot of great extra virgin olive oil, which for me, I think is liquid gold. I think it's so good for you. And they use this extra virgin olive oil to make their veggies taste good. And for this reason, I believe they and probably their children eat a whole lot more veggies and salads. They're really revered because they're so tasty, and they place a big importance on their vegetables and making them taste good. And I believe the extra virgin olive oil that they use with that plays a huge part of that, or part in that. So anyway, I digress, back to bread. We have a huge variety, which I'm going to pull apart today, but honestly, I could talk about my Nonna and, what I've learnt from her and cooking and the Mediterranean way of eating a whole lot more. So I apologize if I digress to that, but it's very close to my heart. So maybe I'll do a podcast on that later. But back to bread. We have the gold medal winners, which are the whole grains. No surprises there. Whole grain bread contains the entire grain. So what this means, it's the whole grain, the bran outer layer. Now, in that bran outer layer, we have a lot of fiber. And as we know, as we will continue to discuss in this podcast, fiber is like the fertilizer for our insides, for our gut. It is so important for gut health. So the bran outer layer of the whole grain actually contains the fiber and vitamins and minerals. Really nutritious. Then we've got the middle layer of the whole grain, of the grain of wheat, for example. And that middle layer consists mainly of starches. It's called the endosperm. And it also has some vitamins and minerals in that middle starchy layer. And then the inside is the germ. For example, wheat germ, which is where the grain is sprouted from. And that germ is very rich in good fats, which is where, for example, you get wheat germ oil from, and also other vitamins. So the whole grain offers the nutrition of the bran, the endosperm, and the germ. So you're getting a lot more nutrition there. And with whole grain comes what we call slow release carbohydrates. It's a low glycemic index bread. So that means that sugar is drip fed into your bloodstream. Sugar is released slowly into the bloodstream once you've eaten the bread. So you get a more sustained release of energy over the morning or once you've eaten it. So you're staying fuller for longer, and it's much better for our metabolic health to be having these low GI carbohydrates. So whole grains are good for two reasons. You get the whole part of the grain, all the nutrition and the fiber nourishing your gut, and it's a slow release carbohydrate. So this is why whole grains or wholemeal whole grain products, so by that I mean it's like a wholemeal base with the whole grains added, or just white base with the whole grains added, but whole grains offer that elite level of nutrition for those reasons. What we don't want to get when we eat bread is a real sugar rush. And that's what happens, and we will get to white bread later, but that's what happens when we move to an ultra-processed, refined bread. The sugar is rushed into our bloodstream. So then what happens is you get an insulin rush into the bloodstream, and that's not good for long-term metabolic health. Now, sourdough is a great option as well, because sourdough is naturally a slower release bread or carbohydrate. So it's a lower GI carbohydrate because of the way that it's made. The fermentation process means that it has a higher acidity level, which not only makes it a slower release carbohydrate, but it actually increases how available the nutrients are. So again, the gold standard would be a whole grain sourdough. And look, there is a huge variation in the authenticity of sourdough, and sometimes it is hard to know which is which. So traditional sourdough involves a much longer process. You use a traditional starter, which is a live fermented culture, compared to a commercial yeast, which this authentic traditional starter is fermented over a period of time, and it results in an acidic and chewy bread. So if you see yeast in the ingredients list, that's more like a commercial yeast, a commercial product. It's not as authentic. It's not as authentic as sourdough. The authentic sourdoughs will not use a commercial yeast. So with sourdough, I think in each category, whether it's a whole grain category or a wholemeal category or a white category, sourdough is a great option if your children will eat it. So if you're still in the white group, then go for a white sourdough. If you're in the wholemeal group, then go for a wholemeal sourdough. Or if you're in the grainy group, then a grainy sourdough is great, but then whole grains are great anyway. Okay, next up, wholemeal bread. Now, wholemeal bread is made using the whole grains that have been ground up or milled into a flour. So essentially, many of these nutrients are still present in the wholemeal flour, although some of them may have been destroyed during the milling process. Wholemeal bread is very high in fiber. In fact, sometimes wholemeal bread can actually be even higher than whole grain bread. But having said that, the fiber is a little more fast release. Now, it's not high GI like or super fast release like white bread, but wholemeal bread's more middle of the range. It does release a bit more quickly compared to grainy bread, because when you grind up the whole grains, you've effectively already started the digestion process for us. So you've ground up the whole grains. So that means the carbohydrate releases a little more quickly into the bloodstream. So this means that wholemeal bread won't keep you or your children feeling full for as long compared to the whole grain bread options. Now, in the wholemeal category, my pick would be either a sourdough wholemeal, or if sourdough wholemeal's too chewy for your kids or it's not to your palate or preference, a fresh wholemeal versus one that's sitting in the supermarket shelves would be my choice. And the reason I would go for a freshly baked wholemeal is because some of the breads that you find in the supermarket will have more additives and preservatives in them, so they last longer. My case in point. Today, as I said, I was on TV doing a segment on breads, and we were actually supposed to do this last Wednesday, but in the nature of live television, we got bumped to this Wednesday. Totally fine. However, I had already bought all the bread last Tuesday. So what I'd bought, one white, one wholemeal, one grain, supermarket varieties. So they've been on the shelf and you can easily get them whenever. Then I got a fresh wholemeal bread loaf from the bakery. And then I got 3 sourdoughs. Now, we ate once we had postponed it. We ate the sourdoughs. Well, actually, I ate the wholemeal and started eating the grainy sourdoughs, and the rest of the family ate the white. But it was really interesting. I kind of knew, but I gave it a test anyway, and it actually happened. I left those 3, well, actually left 4. I left the 3 supermarket bread loaves in the bag. And I thought, see if these last till next Wednesday, plus the fresh wholemeal loaf. So I left those 4 loaves in the bag. The other bag had the sourdough and we ate them. Well, we ate some of them. I think the whole grain one's still in the fridge probably. But anyway, that's another story. So yesterday afternoon, I went to check on the breads because I thought I can't go on live TV with moldy bread. But I thought I'll just check. I bet you it's still okay. And guess what? It was. A week later, it had been sitting there literally in the bag for 7 full days. And it looked like I'd bought it today. In fact, one of the camera crew started to eat the white bread because he loves bread. And he started telling me about how he loves at Christmas time, he loves white bread and prawn and mayonnaise sandwiches. Oh, my God, this is disgusting. But anyway, he was going into bed. I'm like, it's been a week. But that just goes to show how much these additives and preservatives turn this into almost a long life product. And I don't think that's a good thing. So back to my point about wholemeal breads and this really goes for any bread in any category, fresh is best. Like, 30 years ago when I was shopping with my Nonna, there was just more fresh bread, I think, as more fresh bread as an option, but that was kind of the dumb thing. You didn't have, I know we did have bread in the supermarket then, but I feel like more of us ate just the fresh stuff from the bakeries, the little bakeries, and you had your little delicatessens and whatnot. Now I'm showing my age. But anyway, I feel that the fact that we now have so much bread that lasts so long in the supermarket because of all these additives and preservatives, yes, it keeps them lasting longer, but, what is it really doing to our bodies? And I know that our food authorities say that they are safe for human consumption and they are fine to have in food products, but really at the end of the day, do we really know? And so, look, my kids will still eat stuff with additives and preservatives, and it's really hard to escape it. But if we can make a choice to, on a daily basis, put foods into our body that will reduce the consumption of these additives and preservatives and emulsifiers and whatnot, then great. So if you can make a simple decision to buy fresh wholemeal bread, not the one that's been in the supermarket, then perhaps, and your children are eating this multiple times every day, then you are significantly over the weeks and the months and years going to reduce their intake of additives and preservatives. So a simple swap to something that you do repeatedly can make a big difference. I guess it's just like saving money, right? They said if you just put a little bit away all the time, eventually it's you end up with a fortune. So this is the same thing, but in the reverse. The less additives you're putting in every day, it makes a big difference over time. So I do need to pause and say that some of these supermarket varieties are fortified, and there is a place for these. And I certainly in my clinic have many patients that are iron deficient, for example. Now, some we talk about, boosting iron through various food sources and increasing absorption, and a lot of the stuff that we now have, all my Nourishing Kids members have access to in my online portal and in the membership. They've got all of that information. So we talk about all that stuff. And certainly sometimes children need supplementation. But there are cases where kids are really tricky to supplement. So they refuse the liquid iron. They won't take food that's got the granules that we sprinkle in. We try all the tricks and they still refuse it. And they're not eating any of the other iron-fortified foods that, we've thrown at them. And so sometimes we really need to rely on iron-fortified bread, for example. And in that situation, I think you need to work out what primary concern number one is. So if the concern is iron deficiency and boosting the iron for, energy levels, brain health, so that they're sleeping better, so they have more energy to get through the day and learn better at school, then yes, give them the supermarket iron fortified bread. That's the most important thing right now. And we can move them on to, a fresher loaf later. So sometimes there is a place for these iron fortified breads. And certainly when I've done dietary analysis of patients' intake, simply swapping their bread to iron fortified makes a massive difference to their daily iron intake. So they do have a place, but if your child's not iron deficient, then yes, I would choose the fresh bakery option. And the wholemeal bread actually does contain iron naturally. So then it's like, well, how can we maximize the absorption and reduce, interfering with the absorption? Because there are foods that actually interfere with iron absorption as well. And I will do iron in a whole nother podcast as well. Look, I'm creating a lot of podcast episodes for myself, aren't I? But no, I look forward to it. So look, at the end of the day, I think some key take homes here are fresh is best. The fewer ingredients, the better, because we really want to limit all the additives and preservatives there. So fresh, fewer ingredients. And if you can go a sourdough option, then possibly great. Look, if you can go the whole grain option, amazing. So it's really about trying to look at where your family's at, where your kids are at in terms of what breads they're eating, and try to make a little upgrade without causing too much saga or rocking the boat too much with your kids. Now for white. So to make white bread, you take the middle part of the grain, which is called the endosperm. That's the starchy part of the grain. Now you take that starchy part of the grain and you mill it, you grind it down so it's back to that flour again, but then you bleach it. So it's been milled, processed, bleached, and really at this point, there's not much left apart from starch, carbohydrates. And because it's been so highly processed, it is a higher GI product and it's got very little fiber. And for this reason, companies will often jazz up the white bread with added fiber to make it high fiber, or they'll add other nutrients to make it low GI. And look, if this is where your child is at, that is absolutely fine. So this is where your child is at. That is absolutely fine. And there is absolutely no judgment because I get it. I get how kids can be. So if white bread is where things are at in your family, my advice is, number one, if you can move them from that more highly processed white bread over to a white sourdough, amazing, because that will make it a little lower in GI or a little slower in how fast the sugar releases into their bloodstream. So that's going to be a good thing if you can slow down how quickly the sugar releases into their bloodstream. And the white sourdough is still going to be a bit higher in nutrients. Now, number two, if they're not up for sourdough, then I would go for a fresh white loaf, if you can, with fewer ingredients. So as little ingredients as possible, because that way we're really limiting the additives, emulsifiers, preservatives, and all of that extra stuff that we really want to try to avoid where possible. Now, if you had a white bakery option that was fiber enriched, that would be a good choice. And that would be a preference instead of that white, more long life, ultra processed bread in the supermarket. Now, if you're at the point where the only thing that your child will eat is the white processed bread, then all is still not lost, because you know what? At the end of the day, it's still carbohydrate, still going to be getting B group vitamins, still going to be getting thiamine and iodine. All is not lost. So do not beat yourself up. There is still light at the end of the tunnel. And what we need to do is add good quality protein or fat to the white processed breads, because that's going to improve the nutrition of the meal or the snack, and it will actually slow down the release of sugar. So, for example, if you add avocado, you're going to be adding a bucket load of nutrients to that. Or if you're adding peanut butter, again, it's a great source of healthy fats. It's got protein, it's got iron. So if you're adding peanut butter to white bread, that's going to be a big upgrade. Now, again, I would try and choose a more wholesome peanut butter rather than those ones that are more highly processed that have got a lot of sugar and salt. And again, look at the ingredients. If it's just peanuts and a bit of salt, or just peanuts, then great. But the more ingredients, then probably try and leave those on the shelf and choose one that's got fewer ingredients. But back to my point, if you are adding good quality fat or protein to the highly processed white bread, then it is actually going to slow down that release of sugar into the bloodstream. So protein and fat act to lower the glycemic index of the meal. It's actually called the glycemic load of the meal. And that glycemic load will be slowed down when you add protein and fat. Whereas if you didn't, and they just had, for example, white bread and maybe a little bit of butter and jam or Vegemite, then that's going to be still a relatively high GI fast sugar. So aside from a short ingredients list, one other thing I also tend to encourage parents to look at in that shop bought bread is the nutrition table. So the ingredients list will list every ingredient in the product, from the largest ingredient right down to the smallest ingredient. And then you've got the nutrition table, which is what I also encourage parents to look at, because per 100 grams, you can compare fiber and salt intake, or salt in the product. And salt will be often written as sodium, So to compare say 2 wholemeal breads or 2 white breads in the supermarket, I would look at the fiber per 100 grams and choose the higher fiber option. And I would look at the sodium per 100 grams and I would choose the lower sodium option. So that way you can still make healthier choices within the white category. Well, that really goes for every category. I would look at fiber, I would look at the salt, and you can also look at the percentage of whole grains in the ingredients list. That's another thing that they've started doing in recent years, is looking at and writing percentage of whole grains. So you can also do that in breakfast cereals, but we'll talk about that in another podcast. So there is always a silver lining. You've just got to find it, even if it is in the processed white bread world. I'm here to help you find it and make you feel less guilty about how your kids eat and help you make little tweaks that can make a big difference in those foods that they consume daily. So hopefully that's given you a bit more insight into bread. I'll wrap things up now. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast. And once you've listened to a few, if you're really receiving some value, then please leave me a review, because that helps get the podcast out to more people. Please let me know what you'd like me to discuss. I'm always up for a chat. Bye for now.